The UK's new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, prepares to move into Downing Street, vowing to deliver Brexit and energise Britain. Theresa May headed to Parliament this morning for her last Prime Minister's questions, saying farewell after 3 difficult years in power.
Politics isn't about exchanges across these dispatch boxes, nor about eloquent speeches or media headlines. Politics is about the difference we make every day to the lives of people up and down this country.
Theresa May will head here to Buckingham Palace this afternoon, where she will tender her resignation to the Queen. Moments later, Boris Johnson will be summoned to the palace for his audience with Her Majesty, when she will invite him to become her 14th Prime Minister. Even before he's entered number 10, the moves to form his new government are already underway. We'll have details of the new appointments throughout the afternoon.
And the rest of the news here this lunchtime. After thunderstorms sweep the country overnight, temperatures could reach 36 Celsius today in some parts of the UK. And not the best start for England in their 4-day test against Ireland at Lord's.
In sport on BBC News, Britain's Adam Peaty looks to add 50 metres breaststroke gold to his 100 metres title at the World Aquatics Championships in South Korea.
Good afternoon from Buckingham Palace on the day that Boris Johnson will become the UK's new Prime Minister, the 55th person to hold that office. After 3 years and 11 days in power, Theresa May has just appeared in the Commons for the last time at Prime Minister's Questions, where MPs paid tribute to her sense of public duty and service. Mrs May told the House she was pleased to be handing over to Boris Johnson and offered him her full support. Well, Theresa May will soon return to Downing Street to say goodbye to staff that she has worked with since July 2016. Not long after that, she will depart Downing Street for the last time, addressing the nation as she leaves. Well, Theresa May will then be driven here to Buckingham Palace, where she will tender her resignation to the Queen. A short time later, Boris Johnson will arrive at the palace to be formally appointed as Britain's new Prime Minister. He's already begun the process of forming his new government, with senior appointments to the cabinet expected before the end of the day. Our first report this afternoon is from our political correspondent, Ian Watson.
Dressed in her party colours, Theresa May walked out of number 10, her 3-year tenure coming to a close. She'd been dealt a difficult hand when she came into Downing Street, and her biggest regret on leaving was not delivering the result of the EU referendum. Order! At noon, she faced MPs for the last time as PM. She said she was content to relinquish power to Boris Johnson, but from MPs' reaction, they weren't so sure.
I am pleased to hand over to an incoming leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister, who I worked with when he was in my cabinet, who... Yes.
Jeremy Corbyn directed some of his attacks not at the current Prime Minister, but the next one. He said Boris Johnson had no mandate to run the country.
The best thing the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge could do later on today, when he takes office, is to call a general election and let the people decide their future.
And now that Theresa May was going, she decided to try to take her leading opponent with her.
As a party leader who has accepted when her time was up, perhaps the time is now for him to do the same.
Boris Johnson's aides say that as Prime Minister, he'll act more like a chairman than a chief executive. That means the people who will be sitting around the top table with him here in Downing Street will be absolutely crucial. His cabinet will look very different from Theresa May's. There'll be more long-standing Brexiteers for a start. But he says it will also reflect modern Britain. In practice, that means more MPs from ethnic minority backgrounds in big jobs and more women, though this time not in the top job.
Have you handed in your resignation?
Some big names around the current cabinet table have said they'll go, not least the Chancellor, Philip Hammond. The price of a seat at Boris Johnson's top table is a willingness to sign up to no deal if need be, and some ministers think that's too high a cost. But sources close to Boris Johnson say some new or recycled brooms are on their way. There'll be a big job for the former International Development Secretary Priti Patel, who resigned over high-level but completely unauthorised meetings with Israeli politicians. Alok Sharma, the Employment Minister, is also on the way up. And there'll be a return to government for the former Sports Minister Tracy Crouch. She'd resigned because she believed her government was being too slow to reduce the maximum stakes in gaming machines. Now, listen carefully. Does this sound like a job application?
Well, I think it's important that we have a government that reflects modern Britain, but at the same time the modern Conservative Party. So, you know, a party of all talents, but importantly, a party now that's going to unite and come together and get behind our new leader.
Some big staffing decisions have to be settled later today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hot today.
Is Jeremy Hunt in the running for a top job? He was defeated as party leader, but doesn't want to be demoted, so he might walk away from government entirely. Will Boris Johnson move the current Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, in next door to number 11 Downing Street, or would his long-term ally Liz Truss become Chancellor? Some say the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, a former Remainer.
Well, an unusually long Prime Minister's questions for Theresa May's 95th appearance and her final one, a standing ovation as she sat down for the last time as Prime Minister. Let's go to our Assistant Political Editor, Norman Smith, who is in the Houses of Parliament, and your reflection on her final words, Norman.
Well, it was a more sort of reflective Prime Minister's questions, plenty of tributes to Mrs May, including from some of those Tory MPs who frankly have made her life a misery, prompting chants from opposition MPs of hypocrites, hypocrites. But what I thought was striking, although she was tempted by Mr Corbyn and other Labour MPs to say something disobliging or difficult or disloyal towards her successor, Boris Johnson, she didn't, and showed him a degree of loyalty which frankly he and his supporters have never shown her. But I thought there was a sort of visual warning sign for Boris Johnson. Sitting behind Mrs May were the likes of Philip Hammond, David Gauke, David Liddington, former Remainers, most of whom presumably will now return to the backbenches. And they have made very clear, if Boris Johnson seeks to pursue no deal, the gloves will come off. And who knows, Mrs May might even take the gloves off herself.
And Boris Johnson has just 99 days until the 31st of October. He has an awful lot of work to do very fast, including, obviously, appointing some of the most senior senior figures in government.
Crucial in giving us a sense of what a Boris Johnson government is actually going to look like. And the initial picture is that it is one where hardline Brexiteers are going to be in the driving seat. So we know, for example, Priti Patel, ardent Brexiteer, set for a top job, possibly Home Secretary. A lot of speculation about Dominic Raab getting a top job. And interestingly, a man called Dominic Cummings, who he was the mastermind behind the Vote Leave campaign, the evil genius in the eyes of his critics, someone prepared to do things unconventionally and ruffle feathers. And if Mr Johnson wants to strike a rather different approach with the EU, then Dominic Cummings is the man to tread on toes, smash a few plates and throw the crockery around.
Norman Smith with the latest there from Westminster. And let's just show you now, because as I said, it was a longer than usual Prime Minister's questions, and we can show you the final moments, Theresa May, as she made her final comments to the Commons.
And that duty to serve my constituents will remain my greatest motivation.
Ovation for Theresa May. 3 years, 11 days in office. She is leaving the Commons there, and she will be heading back to Downing Street shortly, where she will say her final goodbyes, and she will also address the nation before making her way here to Buckingham Palace. We're expecting that to happen 2:30, 2:45, who knows, the timings could be quite loose, but that is when she will arrive here to tender her resignation to the Queen. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is with me now. The Queen, who, as we can see, the Union flag flying at the moment, is not even here yet.
She's not here. No, she's expected quite soon, I think. She's been at Windsor. Now, she would ordinarily have gone to Balmoral last week, but of course she stayed in London precisely because of this. Now, no one has a similar level of knowledge and experience of recent British Prime Ministers than the Queen. Boris Johnson will be the 14th. Her first, of course, Winston Churchill, a man who fought in the Boer War. They know each other. The Queen has met Boris Johnson as Mayor of London, as Foreign Secretary. He's a member of the Privy Council. So they will have met each other on a number of occasions. I don't think they know each other well. And when he comes here this afternoon for an audience to be invited by the Queen to form an administration on the basis that he is the man who can command the confidence of the House of Commons, that, remember, is the only criteria by which a British Prime Minister is chosen. I think she will have some fairly pointed questions for him. She will want to be reassured that he does have the application, that he does have the grip on detail that is required. Remember, she's had Prime Ministers like Wilson, Thatcher, Brown, Theresa May, who've had a formidable grip on detail. It's her one opportunity now, before she does go to Balmoral, to tease out what are his plans, and she will be keenly interested, particularly, of course, in the protection of the Union of the United Kingdom.
Witchell, thank you very much. Well, Boris Johnson has, as I said, just 99 days to sort out Brexit one way or the other. He has vowed to take the UK out of the EU by the 31st of October, come what may. But with MPs about to leave for their summer break, the timetable is incredibly tight. Chris Morris is at Westminster with some of the key dates ahead. Chris.
Yes, Sophie, it really is tight. Just over 3 months for Mr Johnson to achieve what has proved unachievable so far in just over 3 years, and that is to sort out this Brexit conundrum. As you say, the first date really in the timeline is that this week, tomorrow, Parliament goes into its long summer recess. So most MPs won't be back here in Westminster until September. But that doesn't mean there's going to be a rest for the government. It's got two big Brexit-related issues to deal with. Number one, starting to make diplomatic contacts with all those other European leaders to try to negotiate what they've said is non-negotiable, but also to start planning again at full speed for a potential no-deal Brexit, both within government and within the business community. When MPs do come back in September, they won't be here for all that long, because they are due then to have another recess towards the end of September during the party conference season. And of course, Mr Johnson will be addressing the Conservative Party conference, which begins just at the end of September. And his speech there, I think, will be closely watched as for the mood with which he's going to go into that final month of October. But his first meeting with all the other EU leaders, the people he needs to convince if he is to get a deal to leave the EU by October 31st, something which many people feel is pretty unlikely given the time constraints. That meeting, the EU summit, doesn't take place until October the 17th and 18th. That's just a couple of weeks, really, before that Brexit deadline comes up. Of course, what we don't know are the dates where things may change dramatically, such as a potential vote of no confidence from the opposition. But after most people go on holiday in August, Sophie, September and October are going to be a bit of a roller coaster ride.
Chris Morris, thank you. Well, the European Union's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, has said he's looking forward to working constructively with Boris Johnson to ratify the withdrawal agreement. Our correspondent Damien Grammaticus is in Brussels, but as we just heard, I mean, Boris Johnson has no plans, it seems, to go to Brussels anytime soon.
No, none that are known of here, which is why the EU is waiting to see what position he takes. Now, Michel Barnier, the BBC caught up with him a short time ago. He said that this was a very important moment for Brexit because, he said, the UK had a fundamental choice to make. This is what he said.
We look forward to hearing what the new Prime Minister Boris Johnson wants. What are the choices of the UK? Is it an orderly Brexit? Is it a choice and the preference of the EU? And we worked for the orderly Brexit all along the last 2 years. Is it a no-deal Brexit? The no-deal Brexit will never be the choice of the EU, but we are prepared. And for an orderly Brexit, we will work all along the next few weeks or months with the new UK government.
And we've also been hearing from the European Parliament's Brexit group, and they made very clear, they said no deal would be extremely damaging for both sides, but sticking to the EU's logic and position here, they said there would be no mini deals, no side deals, no sort of extra agreement to mitigate the impact of that, if that is the choice Mr. Johnson makes. Back to you.
Damien Grammaticas in Brussels, thank you. Well, businesses up and down the country have been holding their breath for the past 3 years, dealing with the uncertainty as they wait to find out what sort of Brexit we will have. So what's the reaction now that Boris Johnson is about to move into number 10 and the prospect of a no-deal Brexit is back firmly on the table? Our business correspondent, Danny Hewson, is in Salford. Danny.
Well, one of the first key announcements that we're expecting from a Boris Johnson government is actually to turbo boost regional business. But of course, for regional business, apart from Brexit, transport is one of the biggest issues. And there are big questions about the future of HS2 under a Boris Johnson government. And also HS3, also known as Northern Powerhouse Rail. Will that ever happen? Well, I've got a couple of businesses here with me now. Sam White is the boss of Pucker Insurance, and Mo Issap runs the Infor Group, which trains manufacturers in new technology. Mo, transport is a huge issue. Are you concerned about what Boris Johnson might do for the regions?
Very concerned. I think it's really important to see through the commitments that the government's made and Boris has made in his election campaign. We need HS2 to happen. We need HS3 to happen. The infrastructure is critical. We're in Media City now, and we run a digital manufacturing accelerator from here. We've got connectivity. We're going to have full fibre network by 2027. You know, the digital economy is already contributing 4 billion to the economy. We need a proper infrastructure for the North to really show leadership for the country and for the world. And if we're going to be in a post-Brexit world, we need the northern regions to actually be able to have that investment to succeed.
OK, and what about Brexit, Sam? Are you ready for a no-deal Brexit?
I think everybody has to be at this point. I don't see any signs that we are actually going to get a deal. Both parties seem to be completely entrenched in the position. So whilst I'd really love it if we could get a good deal over the line, I think that the reality is that we've got to prepare for no deal at this point.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Of course, as with everything, businesses here are just waiting for the detail.
And Danny Hewson there in Salford, and we will have more on all of that later in the programme. The time right now, 18 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. Theresa May receives a standing ovation in the House of Commons as she bows out as Prime Minister. She heads to Buckingham Palace this afternoon, where she'll tender her resignation to the Queen. Moments later, Boris Johnson will be summoned to the palace for his audience with Her Majesty, where she will invite him to become her 14th Prime Minister.
In sport on BBC News, England lose early wickets in their only warm-up test ahead of the Ashes. World Cup winner Jason Roy, the first man to go on his test debut against Ireland at Lord's.
Now, forecasters say temperatures in some parts of the UK could reach 36 Celsius today. The heat follows those thunderstorms which swept across much of the country overnight. The RNLI has warned people about the danger of cooling off in rivers and lakes. Andrew Plant is our correspondent in Weston-super-Mare. Andrew.
Yeah, Jane, it is a mere 25 degrees here in Weston. Much cooler than yesterday, of course, although people here tell me that's pretty much a perfect temperature. But perhaps not so tomorrow. As you say, the temperature's set to soar, and that involves taking some precautions, not least for hospitals. The one here, the local general tells us they've brought in air conditioning units for each of their wards to try to keep their staff and patients cool. And police too. They are putting on extra patrols, particularly on the A30, that main road in and out of Cornwall, to try to make sure people don't ever get stuck in hot cars. Storms across much of the UK as Mother Nature let off steam. The owners of this house in Cardiff surveying the damage of a lightning strike this morning, brought on by the fierce heat. Network Rail is warning passengers of speed restrictions, tracks at risk of buckling as the temperatures go up. And warnings too around the water. Divers in the Thames finding the body of a swimmer this morning. Another man died in a lake in the Cotswolds yesterday afternoon.
Elsewhere, hospitals having to work hard to keep patients and staff cool.
All of our patients are at risk, but the elderly are most vulnerable. So we're making sure we're increasing their fluid intake by doing more regular tea rounds with squashes and milkshakes. We have ice lollies and ice creams on offer as well.
For seasonal businesses, an early start this morning, deliveries of extra ice cream. These few days, they hope, shaping up to be their busiest of the year.
When you see this hot weather on the way, what do you start doing?
Rubbing my hands together, booking the holiday, you know, those sort of things. No, but it's a long winter, so, you know, you've got to take it when it's there, you know.
Many, though, are stuck inside, business as usual, except for the sweltering temperatures. These workers in a sheet metal factory feeling the heat.
Everyone out enjoying themselves, and it's just too hot to be working. But the job's got to get done, I suppose.
We were inside for a lot of the day to keep out of the sunshine. The beach was really, really busy, but we sort of tried to shade ourselves.
We're more bothered about the children, so we keep them covered up with hats and sun cream, and obviously we'll put sun cream on as well.
Europe is boiling in the heat pushed up from Africa. Germany 33 degrees today, France even warmer, bringing surfers out in force. This week could see record temperatures brought to Britain's shores. At times like these, even the tropical birds need a helping hand, keeping cool.
Andrew Plant there in Weston-super-Mare, and a full forecast coming up later in the programme. In the next hour, the man who led the investigation into alleged Russian interference in the 2016 US presidential election is due to testify in Washington. Robert Mueller, the former special counsel, will appear before the House Intelligence and Judiciary Committees, and the hearings are going to be televised live. Our correspondent Laura Trevelyan is on Capitol Hill. Are we going to learn anything new from this, Laura, do you think?
Very good question, Jane. Well, this is Robert Mueller's report, all 448 pages of it. He has said this report is my testimony. He doesn't intend to go beyond what's in here. However, Democrats are hoping that because most Americans haven't read this report, that he is going to educate the American public about what he actually said, namely that there was a systematic and sweeping attempt by the Russians to interfere in the 2016 election, that the Trump campaign thought it would electorally benefit from information stolen by the Russians, that although there wasn't a criminal conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia, the president himself was not cleared of the crime of obstruction of justice. So Democrats are hoping they can illuminate all of this. Republicans, meanwhile, they're hoping that they can discredit the origins of the inquiry. The president himself has been tweeting it's all a witch hunt.
Laura, thank you. Laura Trevelyan in Washington. Now, hot on the heels of their Cricket World Cup triumph, England's only warm-up match before the Ashes is underway. They're playing Ireland in a 4-day test at Lord's, where Ireland have made a spectacular start, as Joe Wilson reports.
The World Cup? Forget it. It's test matches now. Shirts change colour, as does the ball. Red for embarrassment? Well, cricket should not be a closed shop. Look closely. Ireland have earned this opportunity. Bowling here to England's Jason Roy, big hitting hero of the World Cup. Dismissed for 5 on his test debut. Ireland's bowler Tim Murtagh in his 38th year. Sterling even caught it without using his fingers. Ireland longs to watch its cricketers fulfil their careers with Ireland. Young men like Mark Adair. He got Joe Denley out LBW. These are the batsmen who'll win England the Ashes, theoretically. Rory Burns next to go. Now captain Joe Root, big appeal. The review proved it was true. He was out 2 for 2. Bairstow made 0. From the highest moment of triumph on this ground, England were being bamboozled, unravelled, humbled by Ireland. Woke's gone for none. Moeen Ali, yes, he touched it. Another naught. Tim Murtagh had taken 5 wickets for 11 runs and in one morning had turned cricket expectations gloriously on their head. And a short time ago, I can confirm that England were 85 all out in their first innings. That has to be one of their worst batting displays ever. We have to wonder whether England's players who are involved in the World Cup have had time to adjust to come down from that adrenaline rush. But huge credit to Ireland for seizing this opportunity. And I wonder, standing here again, if there ever will be normal days of cricket
ever again.
Thanks very much, Joe. Joe Wilson at Lords. Let's catch up with the all-important weather now. Chris Fawkes has joined me. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Jane. Well, from dramatic thunderstorms that many of us had last night, our focus is now shifting towards dramatic heat. And what do I mean by that? Well, we could see the highest temperature ever recorded here in the UK as we go on through tomorrow afternoon. The current mark to beat 38.5 degrees Celsius set in Kent, but tomorrow afternoon we could see temperatures hit an incredible 39 degrees Celsius. Now, before we get there, today is plenty warm enough as well. On the satellite picture, the last of that rain that brought the thunderstorms last night is just clearing away from Shetland. It'll be out of the way in the next hour or two. Then through the rest of the afternoon, most of us will have plenty of sunshine, although there will be some patchy cloud for Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, where there will be a few showers later on in the day. Temperature-wise, OK, it's not quite as hot as it was yesterday, but maybe that's the wrong word, because we're still going to see temperatures into the low 30s, peaking at 33 degrees Celsius. And it's another one of those situations where after such a hot day, those temperatures will be very slow to fall. Indeed, as you're perhaps thinking of heading to bed at 11 o'clock tonight, temperatures still up into the low 20s quite widely in the towns and cities, particularly across England and Wales. Quite warm as well for eastern Scotland. So a warm night for sleeping ahead. But then tomorrow, well, with this area of low pressure to the west of the UK, we're drawing up the winds from Spain, across France and into the southeast of England. That's where the highest temperatures are going to be. And it could be a record-breaking day. Now, weather-wise, there will be plenty of sunshine across England and Wales and Scotland too. Northern Ireland, bright initially, but tending to turn cloudier with the risk of a few showers late in the day. And those temperatures surging higher and higher. We're looking at temperatures of 29 in Edinburgh, a much warmer day here. But towards London and southeast England, the real focus of the heat will be around Greater London and in towards parts of Kent, where we could see temperatures hit something like 39 degrees Celsius. So it could be the highest temperature we've ever recorded here in the UK. Now, looking at the weather picture through the evening time and Thursday night, we're going to start to see some big thunderstorms breaking out, particularly across eastern and northern parts of the UK. So again, we'll have skies like this and perhaps some rumbles of thunder to wake you up from your slumber overnight, with some torrential downpours too. On into Friday and the weekend, well, there is the threat of some heavy thundery rain around, particularly across northern and eastern parts of the UK through Friday and indeed into the weekend, with the best of any dry weather probably towards southwestern parts of the UK. Temperatures coming down from that incredible hot weather that we'll have tomorrow afternoon. That's the latest weather. It's back to Sophie.
Chris, thank you very much. Certainly baking hot here in the centre of London. Very hot on a day of high drama. It's going to get very busy around here later on this afternoon as Theresa May comes here to tender her resignation to the Queen, and Boris Johnson will be summoned a short time afterwards to be invited to form a new government. Theresa May has just left the Houses of Parliament after her last Prime Minister's questions. She's being driven back to Downing Street, where she will leave for the last time. It appears a convoy actually coming here around Buckingham Palace. Well, we will come back to those pictures in a moment, but we're going to go to... We need to find out, obviously, what kind of government Boris Johnson is going to form. The Derbyshire spa town of Buxton was split down the middle in the 2016 referendum, voting Leave by just 0.5%. So what do the voters in the marginal seat make of the new Prime Minister? Judith Moritz reports.
Buxton's political colours are a little like the classic Cars on show. The town's a marginal seat, close run between blue and red. Labour currently hold power here, but some of these car buffs are also Boris Johnson enthusiasts. Tell me what you think of the new Prime Minister.
I don't think he'll get any better person. Love him.
You're a fan?
I am.
Why is that?
I just think he's a proper man. Absolutely superb fella.
Got your race at the back at £1,000, we're often bidding at £1,000.
At midday, Buxton's classic car auction got underway. No one here watching Prime Minister's questions, but the prospect of a new PM has caught their attention.
Not a number one fan, but having said that, there's so much uncertainty surrounding Brexit that hopefully that will produce a change. Certainly within our industry, we do notice a lot of people literally holding their breath.
Sitting in the sun, Janice Edwards came to Buxton for a day out and is relaxed about Boris Johnson, though he wouldn't have her vote.
I know he's a highly intelligent man behind that quite often buffoonery. He's sharp and I think he has a good heart. But I actually do want a general election, and to bring Jeremy Corbyn, we need somebody who is more humane, in my opinion.
Buxton has its own Boris Johnson look-alike, but his dad isn't a fan of the real one. When I asked what he thinks of the new Prime Minister, he said he had to choose his words carefully.
I'd probably use the L word for liar, liar, liar. He's only interested in Boris. We'll use the L word for liar, liar, liar. He's only interested in Boris. He's not interested in anybody else other than Boris.
Buxton is known for its spring water, a spa town nestled in the Peak District, which feels a world away from Westminster. But they're watching events there keenly to see whether Mr Johnson's premiership will be a British classic or something less prestigious. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Buxton.
Well, the Prime Minister is now returning to Downing Street. Slightly confusing, as you could probably tell earlier on, as she arrived up here at Buckingham Palace and then went straight back down the Mall and returned to Downing Street. The Queen has yet to return to Buckingham Palace from Windsor. Let's talk to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's in Parliament, to just talk us through what we are expecting to happen in the next few hours.
Well, the main event this afternoon, apart from the audiences with the Queen, is going to be Boris Johnson's words on the steps of Downing Street, his first as Prime Minister, and a huge moment because really the first time when he will have spoken to the nation. Yesterday, after his victory in the leadership contest, that was mainly a more light-hearted speech for the party faithful. This will be the moment when he will set out the Boris Johnson vision, and we are told he'll want to talk not just about delivering on Brexit, but on his non-Brexit agenda. But if there's one overarching theme that I think he wants to get across, it's the sense that this is a country that can recover its sense of optimism and belief in itself.
Norman Smith in Westminster, thank you. So, after 3 years in power, Theresa May will shortly be leaving Downing Street for the last time. She has just returned to number 10 and she will be packing up, saying goodbye to all the staff that she has worked with throughout that time. In about an hour or so's time, she will be clapped out of number 10, as is the tradition, before making a final address in Downing Street to the nation and then heading here to Buckingham Palace to tender her resignation to the Queen. It is a brutal moment for any Prime Minister in politics. We'll leave you now with some of the images from today and her 95th and last Prime Minister's questions.
In future, I look forward to asking the questions. But we are, as the Right Honourable Lady has said, living through extraordinary political times. This House of Commons is rightly at the centre of those events. And that's because of the vital link between every single member of this House and the communities, the commons that we represent. That's the bedrock of our parliamentary democracy and of our liberty. And each one of us, wherever we sit, whatever we stand for, can take pride in that. And that duty to serve my constituents will remain my greatest motivation.
Well, that was a short time ago, and of course in the next hour or two, Boris Johnson will become the UK's new Prime Minister, the 55th person to hold that office. After 3 years and 11 days in power, Theresa May has just appeared in the Commons for the last time at Prime Minister's Questions, where we heard MPs paying tribute to her sense of public duty and service. Mrs May told the House she was pleased to be handing over to Boris Johnson, and she offered him her full support.
I am pleased to hand over to an incoming leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister, who I worked with when he was in my cabinet, who... who is committed as a Conservative who stood on a Conservative manifesto in 2017 to delivering on the vote of the British people in 2016 and to delivering a bright future for this country.
Well, at the end of Prime Minister's Questions, the Mother of the House, Labour's Harriet Harman, paid tribute to Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's always a historic moment when a Prime Minister leaves office, especially when the country faces such difficult times as we do ahead. But her departure marks another milestone, because though we're on to our 77th Prime Minister now, she is only the second woman ever to have held that office. And she put tackling human trafficking and the horrors of domestic violence as a priority at the heart of her government. And can I say that in that respect, her legacy is secure, because everyone in this House backs that, and we will all be committed to taking that forward. Even her harshest critics must recognise her integrity, her commitment to public service, her dedication to this country, and those are qualities that none of us should ever take for granted. But can I just offer her a word of sisterly advice? Sometimes you just have to be a bit more careful when a man wants to hold your hand. I thank her for her service as our Prime Minister, and I sincerely wish her all the very best for the future.
Prime Minister!
Well, can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her question? And of course, the Right Honourable Lady joined this House in 1982 when there was a female Prime Minister, but very few women in this House. And she has played a very important role, and she can be proud of the role that she played in ensuring that more women came into this House as Labour Members of Parliament. And she started something which has started to change the face of this House, which has been very important. I, of course, came here in 1997 as one of only 13 Conservative women, and indeed one Labour Member of Parliament approached me to encourage me to sign the private members' bill list, because he assumed as I was a woman I must have been a Labour Member of Parliament. But I'm also proud to have played my part in getting more women MPs in this House, and I'm sure that amongst the women in this House today there is a future Prime Minister, maybe more than one. Later today, as I've said earlier, I will return to the back benches, and it will be my first time in 21 years, so it's going to be quite a change from standing here at the dispatch box. I'm told that over the last 3 years I've answered over 4,500 questions, over 140 hours in this House. More than I might have expected, Mr. Speaker. In future, I look forward to asking the questions. But we are, as the Right Honourable Lady has said, living through extraordinary political times. This House of Commons is rightly at the centre of those events. And that's because of the vital link between every single member of this House and the communities, the commons that we represent. That's the bedrock of our parliamentary democracy and of our liberty. And each one of us, wherever we sit, whatever we stand for, can take pride in that. And that duty to serve my constituents will remain my greatest motivation.
Well, as you can see on your screen, Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, and this was what he expected, has confirmed he has just handed in his resignation to Theresa May. He writes on Twitter, "It has been a privilege to serve as her Chancellor of the Exchequer for the last 3 years," and attaches the letter that he has written to Theresa May. Well, let's get more on this. Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, is inside the House of Parliament for us. I mean, that one we know about, but all eyes are going to be on who else comes and goes this afternoon.
Yeah, I was watching the sort of MPs sitting behind Mrs May at PMQs, David Lidington, David Gauke, Philip Hammond, all those former Remainers. Presumably all of them will be on the backbenches, and the question will be, will they cut up rough if Boris Johnson does pursue a no-deal Brexit? Let's mull some of that over with the Liberal Democrat Christine Jardine, Labour's Mary Cray, and the Conservatives' Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, let me start with you. I mean, just sort of sketch out how difficult is the task now facing Boris Johnson if he is to secure a Brexit deal in 3 months' time.
I think that was reflected in the style of questions that we heard there. I think Theresa May conducted herself with dignity and humility, but there's no moving away from it. The next 100 days will be absolutely huge, not just for the Conservative Party, but for Britain as well. There is a sense of optimism but also a sense of duty that I'm feeling, that we need to get and resolve Brexit. Otherwise, our party will be in opposition for decades and our country will be very much damaged.
I suppose, Mary Cray, a lot of people are wondering whether Boris Johnson will carry on as he did during the leadership campaign with this very hard-line, uncompromising do-or-die approach, or do you sense that actually just the sort of lack of time, the parliamentary dynamics will force him to adopt a different approach, whatever the ERG may think?
Well, Boris Johnson is the famously flexible politician, as his Remain and Leave opinion editorials for The Telegraph showed, and he came down on the side which was best for Boris. I think we'll see that next time. I think he has created some wiggle room by talking up the prospects of a no-deal Brexit. But let's not forget, this is the man who in Cabinet voted for Theresa May's deal, and I think he's the only politician who could get it through his fractious party. So I think we might see some potential nimble footwork. But one of the things from PMQs was that the news about Dominic Cummings and some of the other characters at the heart of the Vote Leave campaign, which was famously fined by the Electoral Commission, being brought into the heart of the Downing Street operation, I think that's a moment for reflection. And I think the tone in the chamber reflected some optimism from the Conservative side and leaden dread on our side of the House.
Christine Jardine, one other option, of course, is that circumstances will be such that Mr Johnson will have no option but to go for a general election, and soon. How serious do you think is that possibility?
I think it's a possibility that neither the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, if you look at the recent opinion polls, would relish. From our point of view, we would be ready for that. I don't necessarily think it's the best thing for the country. I think what the country needs is for the Conservative Party to stop fighting its internal battles, which it is still fighting, and get on with fixing this and give the people the opportunity to say whether this mess which we are now in, we now see that Brexit is well nigh impossible under any terms, and whatever terms they might agree, they are not as good as the deal that we've got. We need to give the people the final say in this, and for those actually who want to leave, it's the way forward for them as well.
Tobias Elba, what do you make of the sort of Nixon and China theory that only a hardline Brexiteer like Boris Johnson, as Mary Cray was suggesting, could actually sell a deal that maybe is not a million miles from Mrs May's?
Well, I think Mary touches on something very important. Who is able to get across those, bring everybody together, not just the ERG, but the DUP find themselves up a tree. They need to climb down somehow. Other members of our party will look at the DUP and say, well, if this deal is good enough for them, then I'll support it as well. We know that there are some Brexiteers on Labour's side too that want to support a deal to resolve this matter as well. So I'm actually cautiously optimistic that we can get this done. And we're also hearing noises from the European Union. Ursula von der Leyen is saying if we need to be pragmatic and extend the deadline for a few days, we'll be happy to do so. Don't forget that that deadline was imposed on us prior to even us going through this period of having to choose a new leader. They don't actually get back to work until the 1st of November. So what I think you'll see is a change in rhetoric from the campaign, what was on the campaign stomp, to what will actually is the art of the possible of us focusing on this. Repeat, if the Conservatives don't get this done, we could find ourselves in opposition for a decade.
But the parliamentary maths have not changed. There is no majority in Parliament for the deal at the moment. There is no majority for a no-deal Brexit. And whatever Boris Johnson says, he will not be able to get. With the best will in the world, I don't think it's going to go through, and I think we'll see the extension.
Last word, Christine Dillon.
Isn't it depressing that the Conservatives are still talking about the fact that it might be bad for the Conservatives? This is dreadful for the country, and it's time to stop putting the Conservative Party first and think about the country. Boris Johnson, I don't think, is a politician who should be the Prime Minister. And, you know, we have had 3 years, and the European Union said in March, use the time well. And whatever Tobias says, this Conservative government has not used this time well. They've let the country down.
Well, I don't agree with that. I absolutely think we need to move forward on this. There's a sense of optimism and there's a sense of duty, but I absolutely agree we need to put the country first. The country wants this to be resolved, and we will resolve it in the autumn.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed, folks. Well, Boris Johnson, I think, will be at the dispatch box tomorrow morning. He'll have a cabinet first if all goes according to plan, if he manages to appoint everyone by then, and after that, there'll be a statement from Boris Johnson in the chamber.
Thank you very much. This is BBC News, and you are watching history as we say farewell to one Prime Minister and welcome another. Let's go to my colleague Hugh Edwards, who is in Downing Street for a BBC special programme now.
You're watching a BBC News special live from Downing Street on the day the United Kingdom gets a new Prime Minister. Stay with us as Boris Johnson will become the latest occupant of number 10. Mr Johnson will take over from Theresa May, promising what's being trailed as a bold domestic agenda alongside his commitment to deliver Brexit by the end of October, and he'll name the key members of his government team. This afternoon, Theresa May will travel from Downing Street to Buckingham Palace to offer her resignation to the Queen, and then Boris Johnson will be granted his audience with Her Majesty. And then the new Prime Minister will make his way from the Palace to Downing Street, where he's expected to say a few words. The podium's in place, where he'll set out his government's agenda.
Sometime after 3 o'clock this afternoon, the Queen will ask Boris Johnson to form a government in a tradition known as kissing hands. He'll become her 14th Prime Minister since Winston Churchill.
And a rather emotional farewell from Theresa May in her final appearance at Prime Minister's Questions, as she looks forward to serving once again on the backbenches.
The communities, the commons that we represent, that's the bedrock of our parliamentary democracy and of our liberty. And each one of us, wherever we sit, whatever we stand for, can take pride in that. And that duty to serve my constituents will remain my greatest motivation.
So stay with us for full coverage of events throughout the afternoon as Boris Johnson becomes the 55th person to become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.